Hello and welcome. My name is Jeff Smith. I'm the media chair for the Missoula New Party, and we're having a conversation today with Joel Rogers, who's the national chair and co-founder of the New Party, with Paul Haber, who's a political science professor at the University of Montana, and Ren Essene, who is the new housing developer for the organization Word in Missoula. So welcome. The conversation is going to go for about an hour. We're looking for a really informal conversation here, and I hope that you enjoy it. And first question, Joel, is why you started the New Party?
Well, basically because we were fed up with politics as usual in America. We thought that we could do something better. Had some hopes for the country. They were being disappointed by conventional politics, and thought that if we could get out there in electoral space with an alternative party, we could maybe realize those better than we had been.
And we're talking about 4 years ago.
About 4 years ago now, yeah.
And
well, it seems like only yesterday. But
yeah.
4 years ago.
So how did you start? You had a conversation with some Democratic Party activists in 1992. Was there anything in particular that precipitated that conversation?
Well, yeah, actually a little bit before 92, there had been an important election in New York, I guess in 1990, David Dinkins versus Rudolph Giuliani. And this is a long story. I don't know if you want to actually hear the origins of the new party. But
I do, yeah.
Okay, the governor at the time was a guy named Mario Cuomo. Do you remember Mario Cuomo? And in the 1990 election, the Liberal Party, New York has cross-party nominations, so more than two parties, or more than one party can nominate the same candidate. And the Liberal Party had nominated, along with the Republicans, Giuliani. The Liberal Party usually cross-nominates the Democrats. Cuomo was mad at the Liberals for that. And so he said to his friend Jan Pierce, who's the head of Region 1 of the communications workers, you know, Jan, you've talked about having a Labor Party for a long time. Why don't you try to form one, and maybe I can accept its nomination. And Jan mentioned that to his political director, wasn't particularly interested, but that political director mentioned it to his boyhood friend Dan Cantor, and Cantor, with whom I had worked on some Central America work, called me up and said, well, if you had this opportunity, what would it look like? And so I sent, I don't know, I thought about it a bit and sent him a memo, and that led to some documents and some discussions with union folks in New York that basically didn't go anywhere, finally. Went through 91, but didn't go anywhere. But Cantor started sending those materials out to people and start getting a response, and they'd say very flattering things. That this is the most credible third-party strategy I've ever heard. And we decided by the end of 91 that we'd try to raise some money to do it. So then we went about assembling the money, which involved getting a very wide range of people, about 100 people, to put in a little bit of money apiece, on understanding that nobody had to put in anything until everybody else had put in things. And that gave us our initial nut, and then we opened our doors in 92. We really got going in 93.
Talk about the name.
Well, we wanted an uncontroversial name. We were new, and so we called it New Party. Little did we know that the word party would be so controversial. New continues simply to be vapid, vacuous.
But
I think eventually the name will change. We'll call it, you know, the Progressive Party or whatever. And in most of our places, it's called Progressive X, you know, where X is a town or a state. So Progressive Milwaukee or Progressive Minnesota.
Okay.
We didn't call it the Progressive Party out of the box because some states still have progressive parties, and the lawyers that we had at the time were telling us that you know, we couldn't do that. So now we've got some better lawyers, and we'll see what we can do.
Well, let's sketch the national agenda. Over the past couple of days, you've been talking to a number of audiences in Missoula.
What's it about? Well, we think that the same sorts of things that have made American politics sort of ugly in recent years, economic decline, a lot of inequality, failure of government to respond to those in ways that really make a difference for working families, also open up an enormous potential market for a new progressive politics that would focus on economic issues and democratic reconstruction, and would have some message discipline in that. Wouldn't be all things to all people, but would be targeted on that big, unspoken for new majority that basically neither of the major parties is representing right now. You know, when you think about how public opinion is conventionally mapped in the U.S., it sort of runs from a liberal to a conservative axis. And out here are big government do-gooders without popular values, or that's the caricature. And out here are free marketeering rich people without hearts. or maybe some ungodly fundamentalists who want to force us to take our crucifixes into polling booths, a place where we don't really think that they belong. And most of the public finds themselves in the middle. They're not heartless, but they want to make sure that their tax dollars are used very efficiently. They're not mindless, but they also don't want to get this confusion of religion with politics. And they sort of shuttle back between the parties. But what's not happening with them is to actually have address of the issues that are bothering them, which is stuff around the economy. Progressives, meanwhile, define themselves out here somewhere, at the far end of liberal, redistributionist, whatever. And we think that ensures their cultural distance from the mass public and their defensiveness about failed policies, and that they shouldn't do that. So what we're in favor of instead in the new party is to take that axis and rotate it 90 degrees and make the fight, and this is the fight that we want to help lead, between those who believe that we should have some values operating again in this economy, corporate responsibility, living wages, environmental standards, things like that, and a democracy that's strong and supple enough to enforce them under democratic conditions. And that, we think, is the majority of the people, versus people who don't want any corporate accountability at all, don't want to have elections not for sale, don't want to have anything but a corrupt government. And that, we think, is a tiny minority of wealthy people and their lawyers.
Well, let's do what we've done a couple of times over the past couple of days, which is to start defining terms. When you've been asked a couple of times about to define progressive.
A progressive. Well, what I take a progressive to be is a person who actually believes in democracy. It's rather like Lincoln said, Gettysburg, government of the people, by the people, for the people, and a place which is really dedicated to the proposition that all people are in fact created equal. Progressive believes that people of ordinary means and intelligence, if properly organized, can run the country. They might not do it through direct democracy, they might elect people, but they should be the power. And that if they are the power, then things will be better than if they're not. Take a liberal to be a person who, the joke goes that liberals on principle don't like to take their own side in an argument. A person is into toleration and often into equality, and they share that with progressives, but at least as defined in the U.S., and I don't want to pick fights here, especially unnecessary ones with liberal friends, but at least as understood in the U.S., I think it's meant a little bit more the kinder and gentler administration of people, or the use of government, and only government to help people, rather than a real confidence in ordinary folks, ordinary people.
So you've got these people in the center, and they are going back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. They aren't committed to either side. And you've sketched an agenda that will attract them to this new party.
That's our hope, yeah. That's our hope.
The agenda includes?
Well, there are 5 or 6 things that we're concentrating on, both nationally and to some degree locally, I think. One is economic reconstruction. And what that's about is this, that in the last 20 years, we've seen living standards decline for a bulk of the population. We've seen tremendous increases in inequality, tremendous increases in child poverty, tremendous new concentrations of wealth. We've got the biggest wealth transfer going on in the U.S. that has ever gone on in any country in the history of the world, so far as we know, during peacetime. And we got to do something about that. We've got to raise wages. We've got to make it more difficult to make money treating people like roadkill and the earth like a sewer. And we've got to pave the way to what you might call the high road of competitive strategies in which you pay decent wages and you respect your workers and it's environmentally sound and so on. That's expensive to do for an individual firm, which is why they don't do it. We could do it socially, though, and would pay us off, in the long run socially, and make sense. And we know from other countries that that can, in fact, be done. So first thing to do is to close off that low road route and help pave that high road route and connect people, workers and firms that are stuck on one to the other and enable them to walk that. And that'll, put our economic house in better order. Second thing is to start doing that in our major metropolitan areas, which are the natural pillars of a high-wage, low-waste, environmentally sound, livable economy. And are also the centers of, an awful lot of conflict at the moment and are not exploited sufficiently as economic units.
And they're in great decline.
And in great decline, and often, in their central city cores turning into charnel houses of, despair and degradation. Entirely unnecessary and stupid and shameless and immoral. So metro reconstruction is a natural site for the high road, low road stuff. Third, invest heavily in kids. Most people don't like it when you take their taxes and give them to somebody who's not working. They're not crazy about it. And they're very resistant to affirmative action and a variety of other, late in life interventions. But most Americans believe in equal opportunity, and we think that it's possible to wed that belief in equal opportunity to the resources to make it real, which would make us all better off, because then it could be, really, as Martin Luther King, said that famous day, that we could be judged by the content of our character, and require less, late in life remediation. So we'd like to make sure that every kid in America in this place, which is supposed to be dedicated to some propositions of equality, every kid gets fed and clothed and housed and educated up the kazoo, and is healthy and insured and ready to go when they get to adulthood. That would be a major change in the U.S. We have the highest child poverty rate in the developed world. We have terrible programs on family leaves, and provide working families, in particular working women, who, of course, bear the disproportionate burden of life in the household or work in the household.
What percentage of kids is raised in poverty in the U.S. now? 1 in 4?
It's 1 in 4 overall. It's 1 in 2 for black kids. It's about 1 in 3 African-American populations in cities that's actually below half the poverty line.
And then you talked earlier today about how the poverty level was agreed upon, and that was an agricultural definition, wasn't it, or a nutritional definition of what made minimal nutritional standards?
Yeah, the poverty line, in case folks don't know, owes back to a Department of Agriculture economist named Molly Orshansky, who was asked one day, in I think it was the late 50s, early 60s, I forget exactly when, well, come up with some definition of poverty. And she didn't know what the definition should be. She said, well, all right, here's one way to define it. And she went out and calculated what the absolute minimum food budget would be for a family. What could they do by way of, purchasing to put together a diet, which, as she said at the time, was fit only for temporary or emergency use. And then she asked herself, so what percentage of household budgets do most families spend on food? And at the time it was about 1/3. She said, okay, well, I got my minimal food budget, and I'll multiply that by 1/3, and I'll call that the absolute poverty line. And I think was somewhat horrified later that people decided that, that was going to be the only measure, or that you could maintain people at that level for a particularly long time. Well, we got about 35 million people at that level in America right now. 1 in 5 American children. That's really shameful, we think, in this, the richest nation on earth. Our child poverty rate after tax, after transfers, is about 10 times that of Germany. That's a capitalist country. They believe in competition. Who are we kidding here? Anyway, so invest heavily in kids. Starting gate equality, that's what we like to call it. Extend the welfare state a little bit, make sure that we preserve that Social Security. Let's get some national health insurance. But as we do so, tax it progressively. If you're getting, money from your coupons in your retirement, you don't need the Social Security, so we'll tax it away. And on plausible assumptions, you can show that you could both get people better Social Security and national health insurance and all that social wage stuff, and also do so in a fiscally balanced way. We've got the numbers, and we'd be happy to share them with anyone who'd like to see them. So that's 4. Clean up government. We've been quoting Lincoln here a lot. We find it shameful that you use the guy's bedroom, just to do deals with, Asian or Texan or whatever billionaires to sell an election. That's not what this country's supposed to be about. And in a funny way, campaign, not so funny way, campaign finance is sort of the slavery issue of our time. Lincoln said you can't be a Republican, be half slave and half free. House divided cannot stand. Well, I don't know if we're divided by this, but we're certainly not a democracy. Elections, you can't run for office without lots and lots of money. And that's shameful, because that means that people with lots and lots of money get to call the tune. That's not what democracy is. So we're into campaign finance reform. Not just access stations like this, but commercial stations should have an obligation to provide free time for people who are running for office. We people own the airwaves. It's about time that we use them a little bit to help govern ourselves. And contribution limits and public financing and so on. We could talk about the details. But anyway, clean up government. And finally, level up, not down, on trade. We're not protectionists. We believe in trading. We don't want to screw what used to be called the third world by denying it access to our markets. But at the same time, you don't want to use internationalization as yet another occasion for corporations where there is, of course, no world government to evade all sorts of regulations, environmental standards, worker rights, et cetera. You know, people have heard about the Kathy Lee Crosby or Gifford stuff, you know, the kids working on sweatshops. It's very true in many, many places, you know. Go to parts of Asia, you know, lots of people working in factories making stuff for the American market. They'd never be able to buy themselves.
So leveling up, that means what then?
Well, it means international worker rights. It means respect for unions. It means, you know, limiting child labor. It means not encouraging traffic in prison labor, for example. I think it ideally means social tariffs. That you look at the public bads that are out there that lead to investment decisions, poor environmental enforcement or whatever, and you tax people for that. That's in effect a tariff. And so corporations says, well, I can save 10% if I go into, you know, Mexico because I got a deal there and they won't enforce my clean water regulation, the international clean water regulation. Say, fine, sucker, you go there, but then we're going to put 10% charge on you when you come back. And that's going to make that firm indifferent as between the place that enforces the regulation and the one that doesn't, which is good. And then they still want to go to Mexico, fine. We take the 10%, and then we flip it back to Mexico or some other place that needs it and say, okay, you know, time you got some more education to your folks or cleaned up the water or whatever. So you could use the funds as a source of development monies for more sustainable development. You know, there are all manner of other international regulations that we're obviously going to need in this international world. But the basic idea is that, you know, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, so-called GATT, has a very powerful tendency to level down, to drive living standards, wages, regulatory systems, environmental protections, worker rights, et cetera, to the lowest common denominator. And what we should be doing is really raising things up.
Yeah.
So those are the sorts of things that we believe in. Now, what's interesting about these things is that 60 to 80% of the population agrees. And none of those things is being moved on by either of the major parties. Not a single one. You look at the GATT stuff, we level down. Not up, okay? You look at the Social Security, they're talking about privatizing the thing. You look at the National Health Insurance, they bailed on that a long time ago. You look at investments in kids, we're cutting them, we're not increasing them. You look at our cities, you said they were rotting. And you look at the low road, high road, we've abandoned serious efforts to build the high road. And our wages and our families that are strained to the breaking point now are showing it.
Yeah. Joel, can I ask you a question? Why do you think neither of the two parties are addressing these issues if they are as popular with people as they are?
Basically, I think because they either lack the organizational capacity in connection to popular movements to actually contest the corporate power that would be needed to move them, or they don't have any interest in doing so. You know.
Or they're bought up by corporations.
Or they're bought up by corporations.
So they make trades about what issues they're willing to move forward and which issues they're going to maybe abandon. And I think the public right now with campaign finance reform, that's really what's on people's mind. You see that in a state like Montana where I-125 can pass, ironically, when we're spending so much money on something like the minimum wage increase. And because of all the corporate money that was in the campaign for the minimum wage increase, people didn't vote for the minimum wage, but they knew that there was something wrong with the system. They don't like being bought out for their vote. And so they saw that, and they voted for the campaign finance reform effort of I-125. And I think people are smart underneath to know that they're kind of being fooled and that their values aren't being represented in government necessarily.
Well, which is more important, the person's vote or the campaign contribution? It's pretty obvious which one gets the attention of the major political candidates. It's not the vote, it's the money.
In some ways, I would say that under the existing constraints, we shouldn't expect otherwise, except under very exceptional circumstances. If it costs you $300,000 to run, minimum to even get started on a federal House seat, it costs you $4 or $5 million to run for a Senate seat, or you shouldn't even get into the game, and many of them are more expensive than that, then most people under those conditions are going to respond to what they need to get elected.
Mm-hmm.
We end up beholden to the people who brought them there.
Yeah, money talks, swears.
It does.
You know, Mark Hanna, the great Republican political strategist who helped defeat the populists, said, you know, there are two things that are really important in politics. One is money, and I forget what the other thing is. And unless you get that money as clean money, it's going to be dirty money.
Yeah.
Or unless you use your public powers of ownership and regulation to substitute for the money, say with free TV or something.
Well, that's another example of not being able to tell the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. When you hear the campaign contributions that were offered to the president's reelection campaign, it kind of blends in very clearly with the Republican campaign, though that level of campaign contributions that went to the Republicans. And after a while, you can't distinguish which one broke the law more explicitly, which one took more money. You just can't get a handle on it. They're both
That's right.
corrupt.
I mean,
It
yeah,
ends
it's
up
just
they're both corrupt.
Sorry. Yeah, it's an insane money chase. You got the pollsters, you got the media stuff, you got the direct mail stuff. It's all fueled by money. It creates more money, more power, but it's just more or less insatiable.
So if campaign finance reform goes the way that, say, healthcare reform went, so there was huge popular support of healthcare reform. We thought that Clinton was going to do something about that. We expected Clinton to do something about that. I think people were saying, we want healthcare reform, we want to change the system, and nothing changed, and yet he got reelected. Is that going to be the same thing that happens with campaign finance reform? That's what drove this election. That's what people are really concerned about. Maybe that's one of the top issues people are concerned about. Is that going to go the same direction?
Yeah, I
It's not
actually don't
being
know how
addressed.
visible that issue is with the general public, and if that's a hot button issue. I know that people are disgusted about it, but when they rank it in terms of other issues, they are often, successfully confused by the experts who say it's very, very technical. You don't understand it. Clinton, I think, is playing this dangerous game that the Republicans participate in too, of trying to lower expectations of government even faster than they're disappointed by reality. So he'll go out to some disaster site and put his arm around someone and say, we hear your pain. But, basically he's saying government can't do anything. The era of big government is over, the era of government is over, and got to tie our hands before some, budgetary mast and make sure that we not have any money to spend on investing in kids or doing other things. And yeah, it might be the case, unless we get our act together and do something better, that in fact, given an alternative between Democrats and Republicans one more time, folks will go again with the Democrats. Maybe they'll go again with the Republicans. But if there's so little difference, and we shouldn't exaggerate how little difference there is, but there's substantial agreement between the major parties now on an awful lot of constraining anti-democratic things. But unless there's an alternative, people can't vote for it. Can't vote for something that's not there.
Let's talk specifically about what kind of campaign finance reform that you'd recommend.
Well, what I'd recommend is not necessarily the position of the new party, but I think that you want some combination of contribution limits and some sort of amendment to Buckley v. Vallejo, or some override on that, which permits you to sustain those contribution limits. So you want to get contribution limits down to the point where ordinary people can make them. I think you want to have small people PACs, so that people making small contributions can bundle their contributions and increase their power. Because you want to enable people to get together and increase the power of organization instead of money. Organize people instead of organized cash. But one way is to encourage people to get together with their cash. I think you'd want to have a large amount of free media, TV, and some sort of rule on that whereby you'd qualify that. You'd have signature requirements or voting requirements for all this stuff. And we'd have to show some support in the community to get access.
For a threshold to
some
be able
sort of
to use the
threshold.
free TV.
And then you want to have some sort of, for the residual, you want to have some sort of public financing. And I think the best way to do that is through tax credits, as they do, for example, in Oregon and now in Minnesota and in Canada and other places. And what that is essentially, it's a coupon. You can think of it this way. It's a sort of red, white, and blue dollars. And you get $50 a year, and you can just give it to whatever candidate or party or whatever political action thing that you want. But it's a tax credit, comes right off your taxes, so it's free to you. That seems like a good decentralized way of putting power over the election system back in the hands of the people who are supposed to control it.
Well, I like what you said, because it's not just one thing. It's a more than one thing. It's a comprehensive thing, or you're tweaking the system in a lot of different ways, not just one.
Right.
There isn't going to be one overall solution.
Right.
I might just jump in here as well to say that I think the most interesting thing for me with the new party is how we decide to engage with the electorate. So we're saying, you know, there's a responsibility to be voting, but there's also a responsibility to put candidates up that you might be willing to vote for. And so how do we start at a local level to get people involved? And I think the way you do that is you have issues that really affect people in their communities. And I think that's one of the strategies that we see in the new party that made a lot of Missoulians really excited and say, this is the party for us. Because we were working on local issues. We were working on issues around housing and open space. We were working on issues such as our upcoming living wage ordinance that we'll be working on in the city. And we're working on issues that are going to affect people. And I think right now people feel so disenfranchised. You know, you hear that all the time. People say, oh, I don't want to vote, or I don't feel like I really have a party affiliation. I think people my age in their late 20s, I think the stat was 80% of people my age have no party affiliation. I think that we're beyond the two-party system. I think people my age are saying, the two-party system, you know, what with it? I'm not going to vote for it. It's not something that affects me. It's nothing that I can see that it really impacts my life, because they're going to make decisions, and my vote and my power is not within that system. And so I think the thing about the new party is that we look at local elections and we say these are really important. This is where you train people to become politicians. This is where you train people to go out and be activists within the political realm. And so I think that that's really engaging as a strategy as well, is to move it back locally.
And it isn't only happening in Missoula, right? There are
No.
10 communities across the country?
Well, there are 10 states.
10
about
states.
15 communities. We've got 15 chapters now across the country. And we've just gotten started. But what Ren said is absolutely right. You know, you start local, you think long-term, you run where you can win. You don't run where you don't have a serious chance of winning, but you try to cross-endorse or nominate or whatever, you know, the most progressive person you can find. And you gradually build the organization with members and climb that greasy pole of politics. You know, we've done now, what is it, 190 elections, 130 wins. It's pretty good.
130 wins out of 190 elections.
Yeah.
That's a good record.
Yeah.
And where does this all lead?
Well, eventually it lead to dominance of American society and politics, American public sphere, and the liberation of the spirit and harmony of the American people. And great things, I think, not just for this country, but since it's so powerful, the world. I mean, it's a large ambition, but there's no reason why we couldn't achieve it.
History is going to thrust it upon you?
And it's thrust upon me. It's thrust upon us, though.
On us.
You know, I'm an aging boomer. You know, I'm too old to door knock, too young to die. And still love my country. Would like to put something back. There are a lot of us around, 50 to 75 of them. They're younger people, more intelligent than we, but of course you stand on the shoulders of giants. You know, who want to have a future. And we could do a lot better in this country, a lot better.
So where are these other chapters?
Well, distributed around this country, some in Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Missouri, Arkansas, Maryland, New York. I'm running out of states here. Montana. I mentioned Arkansas.
What kinds of issues are being raised in those chapters?
Same sorts of things that Bren was talking about: living wages, affordable housing, trying to figure out how to reduce sprawl, have more sensible and efficient use of energy and water, reform of public education so our schools really are good and perform according to standards and all the kids get educated and we can all afford it. Some stuff on public safety. Obviously at the local level we can't do too much stuff on international trade, but we are in various ways trying to, remember that low road, high road business, do that in different cities. You know, Milwaukee is a case in point. We've been very active in living wage campaigns there and trying to bring together different elements of the community to get some agreement on the new standards on construction of big public works projects, trying to get a transportation plan together and promoting light rail rather than just endless additional automobile lines as part of the transport solution for the region. You know, it's a real pollution problem that we've got in Milwaukee. I guess you have it here too. It's a pretty delicate airshed you've got. And unless you've got something going on with, you know, land use and planning there, you're going to be threatening the quality of that. But the issues are, surprisingly, are not that different as you go from city to city. You know, we all face these problems of living together. We all face the problems of educating our kids or somebody else's kids, and then, you know, feeling the need to do that. We all face problems of public safety, you know, taking back the night, being able to walk the streets and not have to worry about that. We all face questions about sprawl. But there are solutions for all these things if, in fact, you get the different constituencies that we're trying to bring together. And that's labor, heavily of-color populations, inner-ring suburbanites with central city folks, and, environmentalists and progressive business folks who have a material interest in doing this.
And there are about 10,000 members nationally?
10,000 members, yeah, I should say 10,000 members. When you join the new party, it's a little bit like joining a church or a union or whatever. We don't, wash your brain, but we do, pick your pocket for dues. If it's not going to be your money, it will be somebody else's, and then we'll get back to the Lincoln bedroom business. So yeah, we expect people to pay dues, and then you get a vote. One person, one vote. Sounds pretty democratic to us. If you've got a lot of people in your chapter, that's a lot of votes. If you've got a few people, it's pure. But sort of like the Senate, each state gets 2 people on an executive board. It's called the Interim Executive Council, and that's the thing that I'm the chair of. The state that elects, anyway, that's our basic governance. What's interesting about our membership maybe is that it's almost perfectly half men, half women. Might be a little bit more women than men, and it's at 35 to 40% of color, heavily black. And you're not going to find too many political organizations that are that mixed up in terms of sex, gender, race, et cetera, that are holding together at the progressive end of things. So that's one thing that we're proud of. That and the fact that we haven't lied too much. We told people we're not going to spoil, we're not going to divide the ideological camp that we're all in from, in half and advantage somebody on the far side, some opposing camp. Not going to waste your votes, ask you to vote for people who don't have a serious chance of winning. But we stuck with that as those rates on election wins indicates. And the other thing we haven't done is we haven't split on race and or gender issues, and that's good. It's healing, it's possible, and it's good.
That's one of the things that really attracted me to the new party in the beginning. And one of the things that I think that we've really done quite well here in Missoula. The people that got the thing going here in Missoula was really quite a broad cross-section of people here. If you go to one of the new party meetings that we have regular monthly meetings, if you go there, you'll see Missoula there. You'll see people who come from the labor community. You'll see people who come from the women's community. You'll see people who come working with low-income issues there. You'll see people who are active in the senior community. You'll find students there. And you'll find people who have never participated in politics before, who are using the new party as an opportunity to get involved in their community around a set of common values that people hold collectively together. This is not easy, to bring all this group of people together and reconcile differences, particularly people who have worked for a very long time and are committed to those issues that they hold most dear. I think one of the things that is exciting about the new party is it brings people together in a joint political project who wouldn't normally come together. For example, I don't think it's any great secret that the women's community and organized labor, and people also, I forgot to mention, from the environmentalist community, would all come together and build a common program. I don't see that happening in lots of places, lots of institutional settings. It's too rare. And I think that I feel proud, actually, that we have been able to pull that off to the degree that we have pulled it off. Over some rather oftentimes heated conversations as part of that process, working out not only issues of substance but stylistic differences about how people come to making decisions about collective issues. But as somebody said at a meeting that we had not too long ago, nobody's left. People have walked out of rooms occasionally from time to time, but they've always come back.
Right.
Well, what holds them together?
A couple
Values, common values.
I think the common values
Set of
too,
common values.
and the sense of necessity. I would also say too. I'd actually something occurred to me when Joel was talking a little bit before about the origins of the party on a national level. I think that part of the attraction of the new party, at least I'll speak for myself, and I've heard other people say this too, is the disappointment in Bill Clinton. I think a lot of people who defined as progressives, as Joel was defining earlier, were rather excited about in 1992. I was. I liked what Bill Clinton said on the campaign trail in 1992. He didn't give me everything I wanted, but he was talking a progressive agenda. And then we saw Bill Clinton move, it's no secret, I mean, he became increasingly conservative, I think for reasons that have more to do with the system than with Bill Clinton the man. I think we see another idealistic, progressive Bill Clinton and the system stays the same. Folks get ready for more of the same. You're going to see the same thing happen because that individual will be under the same kinds of pressures that Bill Clinton was. I think recognizing that was a wake-up call for a number of people already defined as progressives, and an opening for more people to define themselves as that it wasn't any longer going to be necessary to work on this issue or that issue or this issue in itself, that we needed to get together to develop a common program that we could take to an arena that is really the only arena that most people in America participate in, which is electoral politics. I think that keeps people coming back too.
So it's a recreating of something that wasn't there. It's interesting that you talk about the national election, the presidential election being the catalyst to get you involved in the local politics, the very, very local issues. And what they have in common to me is activism, that you want to make things better. You want change for the better. And when it wasn't happening at the top, you say, well, I got to get involved at the very bottom, the very local level, move here, work here.
Move here and work here on the local level on an agenda that is broad enough to attract the entire community, which doesn't mean, I mean, if you go to the New Party and you go to those meetings that I was describing before and people come from this issue community or that issue community, people stay active in those communities, which is absolutely fine. But they also say that that's not sufficient. We need to also have some place that we reconcile our different priorities into a common agenda.
Or just move their overlap. I mean, the right wing has all sorts of disputes about whatever, when to begin child caning or something. But they agree that they want to destroy unions and ensure the rule of corporations over the people and degrade the earth. And so they're moving that agenda. We may have all sorts of disputes, but we can agree that we want living wages and decent schools, and investments in kids, and an adequate
Human
safety
rights.
net. Human rights.
I mean, we've been abandoned pretty much by Clinton. I think that people held out, especially through the Republican reign, which is the era that I came into voting. People believed that if we just got a Democrat in there, things would be different, things would be better. And that was what was held up with Clinton. And we were abandoned. We were abandoned on health care. We were abandoned on queer rights. We were abandoned across the board on things that we cared about. And I think that we soon figured out that, you know what, the two-party system isn't going to be the system that's going to work for us. And if we really want to affect change, we're going to have to do something different. What can we do? And the New Party is an answer. The New Party says, okay, let's work locally. Let's start to affect change. Let's get people invested in politics. Let's create a community dialogue, because people don't really talk about politics. People don't really talk about issues and how things are affecting their communities. People talk about it's slamming the person you're running against. It's less about issues, it's less about things that people care about. And so I think bringing it back, bringing it local, talking about issues that people care about, and really being out there and working for the issues that you're concerned about. And I think the coalition idea is really what helps to create our base and our force. We have people on the doors. We have people talking to neighbors. We believe that we're the majority as well. We don't believe that our issues. People say, oh well, gay rights. Oh no, not this year. That's a touchy subject. We don't want to touch it. But we're saying, you know what? The populace believes in human rights. The populace believes in environmental standards and living wage. We really believe that if you let people have a voice and have democracy, that they're going to vote along with us. That we are the majority. So
Well, it's a big
We're the
move.
majority, right. Exactly. We're the majority. We're the silent majority, just waiting to speak.
silent majority.
Well, it's a big move to move out of the big Democratic tent with a capital D. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that is necessary? Why start a new party rather than work through the Democratic Party?
Well, we often work with the Democratic Party. We almost always work with the Democratic Party where we have elected officials, and sometimes we work inside the Democratic Party. So it's both an inside and an outside strategy. But why do you need to have something independent of the Democratic Party, but in constructive relation to it? Might be a way to ask the question.
Mhm.
And you need it because if you don't have anything of your own, anything that's independent, then they will know that, and there's no reason for them to pay attention to you. They can just count on your support indefinitely and then drift further and further away from your values. It's sort of like an abusive relationship, the relationship between progressives and the Democratic Party. They certainly take our support, they certainly take our money, our hearts. Unfortunately, they don't take enough of our ideas these days. And then they just don't execute. Well, the way to end abuse in a relationship is to develop the ability to leave it, whether you want to be in the relationship or not, right? You may want to continue the relationship. Say union people. Unions can't afford to say goodbye permanently to the Democratic Party without some very clear alternative, because if they did, then the only thing between them and the Republicans would be air, right? But they need desperately to have something which can actually articulate, an agenda for working families. The Democrats are simply not doing that now. So this whole business with, fusion and cross-domination that we're into, and then developing an independent but constructive voice that doesn't spoil and doesn't waste votes, enables them to do that, to vote their values without wasting their votes.
And they have choices, I would say, as well. I mean, this whole idea that two parties can represent all the diversity that we have in America, I think, is crazy. I think that we need other parties that have other voices that are going to be pushing in other directions. And I think that people say, oh, well, you're going to just split the Democratic Party and then the Republicans will take all. And I don't think that's happening. I think what you're seeing within the Republican Party is you're seeing fractures and splits there, where you're starting to see other parties. You're seeing Perot's party. You're seeing other parties develop as well. And so I think the ability to have, through different mechanisms, whether it's fusion or proportional representation or whatever political mechanisms you have, if you allow there to be more choices, then people will feel more truly represented, and therefore more people will come out to vote.
I was going to just ask Joel, it might be worthwhile to explain to the folks that are watching this idea about fusion and how that helps the new party to get out of this spoiler problem, which has been so often a problem of third-party efforts.
Sure. Yeah, there are two big problems that people worry about with minor parties. One is the so-called wasted vote problem, and the other is this spoiler problem. The wasted vote problem is simply that we have most elections organized by so-called winner-take-all rules. You really have to get a plurality of the vote, maybe a majority, in order to win office. And these are done within single-member districts. Just one person goes. It's not like the system that Ren was talking about, the proportional representation thing, where you have multiple members. And a new party, just starting out, usually can't win the election on its own. And so it's the case that people who don't want to give up their precious vote, which is often the only real democratic power they have, may not vote for you because they fear that their vote will be wasted, even if they agree with your values. Okay. So the way you deal with that problem is to target carefully, as we've done, and to only run people on your own when you have a serious chance of winning. But then there's also the spoiler problem, and that is that you could sort of divide things on one side of an ideological divide in a way that advantaged the far side. So we run against Clinton or something, and we get 10% of the vote, and Clinton loses, so God help us, and Dole wins, and maybe we wouldn't want Dole since we prefer Clinton to Dole, okay? And it used to be the case that you could construct electoral coalitions between parties, including minor parties plus major parties, and have them preserve their ballot lines, and so participate in races like that, but in a non-spoiling way. So imagine an election in which, say, Dole gets 45% of the vote or something, and Clinton gets 35% on the Democratic line, and then 20% on our line. Clinton would have won the election, as he did, but he would have gotten a very powerful signal that close to half of his support came from a party that believes in investing in kids and living wages and anti-sprawl and basic human rights and preserving Social Security and leveling up rather than down on trade. Our old litany of things there, which of course he didn't get. Now, and then the votes cast on either of those lines are aggregated in his total vis-a-vis rivals. That's how he wins the election. When we look back at American history in the 19th century, as Paul knows, all the minor parties of the period, including minor parties who were around here in Montana, Grangers, Greenbacks, Free Soilers, Populists, etc., relied upon this tactic. And some of them were pretty successful. They were able to do deals with the Democrats to pressure them in certain directions or to introduce new issues into public debate, as the Populists certainly did, and to use it as well to gain ballot status and to or actual access to office and maintain their position in office for long periods of time. And because they were successful, the two parties got together at the end of the century and declared the practice illegal. There was a Michigan legislator said at the time that his state passed a ban. Well, we can beat the farmers and the Democrats separately, but we can't beat them together. Let's make sure they never get together again. He was referring to a Democratic populist alliance. And then Democratic states, the Democrats passed them against Republicans, and then the two of them have maintained them ever since. Well, one thing the new party's doing is trying to bring that practice back, to re-legalize that. And the effects will probably be as they are in New York, where you have 3 or 4 parties rather than just 2, and you have a little bit more competition. And minor parties there play a very, very important role, or can play a very important role in electoral outcomes. So now imagine a world different from the one you now inhabit. Imagine that we win this case. We've got a case before the Supreme Court. And you awake in 1998, you go into that ballot box, and you got the new party program, maybe by that point will be called the New Progressive Party, the Progressive Party of America, or Progressive America, who cares? We can call ourselves Frank. It doesn't matter. It's the values that matter. So you got the Progressive Party, and they cross-endorse a bunch of Democrats and maybe 1 or 2 Progressive Republicans and some independents, et cetera, and then they run a bunch of people on their own, and it's a straight ticket thing, and you know what you're voting for. You get to vote your values, never fearing that you're going to waste your votes. I think that'd be great for progressives to really get out there and be able to declare themselves in that way, in a way that kept their convictions but didn't sacrifice their prudence. That's basically what we're about. And joining the new party, you don't have to change your registration or anything else. You just got to, sign on to these sort of basic values, which most people, in fact, agree to.
And this decision is coming down soon.
Hope so. Yeah, we did oral argument in the U.S. Supreme Court in early December, and we hope to get a decision, very soon. We expect it certainly before June, hoping to get it in March or April. We'd like to get the issue decided. If we succeed, as Justice Rehnquist said from the court, this is really going to make a big change in American politics. If we fail, it's not fatal to us. It'd be a setback. Then we'd continue to do the city-based stuff, and it's a slower climb. But I'm hopeful that we'll succeed. We're looking for 9 votes.
Let's talk about that argument in the Supreme Court. Who argued against it?
The state of Minnesota defended their statute. We challenged the Minnesota statute, which banned the practice of fusion, or multiple party nomination. The grounds upon which we challenged it were these, that parties, have First Amendment rights. And among the rights guaranteed by the First Amendment are rights to associate. And we said, well, parties should be able to associate. If they want to freely associate, they should be able to get together on the ballot, just as ordinary individuals ought to be able to get together on a street corner. If they agree on something, why can't they associate? That was the decision that the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, reviewing a negative decision in Minnesota, found in our favor. They ruled 3-0 for us, that in fact a state ban on the practice of fusion, consensual fusion, did unconstitutionally burden the rights of parties to associate in that way on the ballot. Now, Minnesota argues in response that the ban is necessary to avoid voter confusion. This is their principal argument. Our rejoinder to which is that would, you've got to be pretty dumb, as Justice Stevens said from the bench of the Supreme Court argument, to be confused by this. This is not real rocket science here. Or you'd have to assume that people in New York, where the system maintains, are much smarter than people in Minnesota. Sort of insulting, I think, to the people of Minnesota. And having lived a long time in New York, I see no empirical evidence of that at all. Or that our 19th century forebears were a lot smarter than we are. And in many ways, I think they were. But basically this thing is not rocket science. So that's one argument they make. And the other argument they make is that, this is a minor burden on minor parties. But there the evidence is very, very clear. You've never had stable minor parties in the U.S. for any period of time unless you've had fusion. And whenever you've had them, whenever you've had fusion, you've had such parties. So on the facts and the law, we think we're in pretty good shape. But, we don't know.
This is a tough Supreme Court.
Pardon me?
This is a tough Supreme Court.
Yeah, well, they're all tough, just for different sorts of things, I guess.
Did you have any sense from the kind of questions that they asked, what directions they were heading in? I know that commentators always talk about the questions that they asked and try to analyze their thinking on the
Yeah,
questions.
well, I guess they were concerned with getting an argument as to why this was not just the camel's nose that would lead, in fact, to proportional representation or the invalidation of any number of other fundamental design choices in state electoral systems.
Mhm.
And the argument that we made was that, well, sometimes straws do, in fact, break camels' backs. Sometimes it's the combination of restrictions that is bad. So you might say, well, let's have single-member districts versus proportional representation and have that insulated from constitutional challenge. But then once you've made the decision about single-member districts, then you've got to have fusion, because otherwise it's a killer for minor parties. Okay, that'd be a way in which the straw could break the back. And we argue that it's really content restriction, pure and simple. That is, it's really it's limiting the type of speech, not just the time, manner, place. And for Minnesota to say that's trivial is really to trivialize politics. Parties agree, and it's important when they do agree on all manner of things. You know, we had a bipartisan Cold War consensus on foreign policy for a long time in this country.
right.
And whether you were for or against that consensus, the fact that it existed as a consensus was an important political fact, even as the parties disagreed about other things. Well, in the same way, parties decide that they agree on a candidate. That's an important fact. It tells you information about the candidate. And there's no reason why that sort of information should be withheld from the electorate. And besides, it's like what Ren was saying before about choice. What's the problem here? Why, if two parties freely decide to associate, should we prevent them from doing so?
Yeah.
It'd be like preventing, 3 students in Montana from associating in a household because they were in a conventional family. Seems sort of silly, doesn't it?
Which we fought and won.
Yeah,
Here
right.
in Missoula, the family definition.
I want to talk a little bit about the climate in the country right now. Why? I think
Very temperate. Continental-sized landmass, very good topsoil, temperate climate.
Don't like the weather. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little bit about some of what you said to some students today at the university. I guess one of the students said, "Why should I be interested?" It was the reporter from the Kaiman who asked you that. What does the new party hold for students? And I think behind that question, she was saying, students are pretty apolitical these days. They don't trust either political party. They don't really want to participate that much because they think it's all corrupt. And she came out with that question first of all. What do college students have to gain from new party?
Well, let me try to answer that question, but before I do, let's go back to this apolitical stuff. I mean, to distrust the two major parties is not to be apolitical. It's to have a view on whether they should be trusted. That's a political view.
We're sending a message by not voting, and I think that was something that Pat Williams at the forum maybe didn't hear quite clearly, that the message that was being sent when people didn't vote for Humphrey against Nixon, that was a message that was being sent, and that should have been heard by the Democratic Party. And so many times the messages that we're trying to send to the Democratic Party, whether that's by not voting or whatever it is that we do within the Democratic Party, is not heard and not responded to. And it's really upon the Democrats to really respond and say, boy, why are people apathetic, or why are people not voting within our
the
party?
Republicans are one of the established parties. But, it's really insulting to the intelligence of young people to think that, a bunch of rock the vote commercials are going to get them to come out to, vote for stuff where basically they're not even on the screen. I mean, what was there seriously about aid to students or anything for students or higher education or what to do with labor markets when you're first entering them? It was in that last campaign. I saw nothing, really nothing. And for people who are, students here say, this is a prestigious university, it's a big research thing. People go through 4 years, typically 5 or 6 years to complete their degree. And what they're finding is that they enter a labor market where they got $16,000 a year jobs, without insurance, and a ton of debt at the other end. And this is not quite the American dream. This is not what was, told them when they were kids. You behave, you take the SAT, you go through high school, you get into, U of M, and, then you're going to get somewhere. Well, they're not getting anywhere. That's a real problem. That's not just a student problem. That's an American problem, because if you don't have people coming into labor markets and make some money, they can't form families. They can't do anything. So what does the new party offer students? A future. A future. We offer an attempt to build an economy that's going to be accommodating of them, and a set of communities and places that are going to be inviting to living and growing up and taking care of themselves and propagating the race or not propagating the race and moving forward. And we offer them some democracy and some power, not uniquely as students, but just as Americans. This business with campaign finance is just, it's ridiculous.
And I teach at the university and here in Missoula, and it's really quite striking how much difference there is in the attitude that students have today compared to when I went to college in the 70s. When I went to school in the 1970s, I felt like that education was supported, and then when I would get done with that education, I would be able to find a good job. I had great confidence in that. That's not the state of mind of students today. And that's an intelligent response on their part.
Mhm.
They have every reason to be worried because when they leave the university, I have students come to me all the time and say, well, what kind of job am I going to be able to get? And it's a very different answer than it was just a generation ago. It's quite widely known now that household income over the last 20 years has essentially stagnated. And it's only been able to even stagnate because of increased paid work by households, mostly by women now going out into the workforce. If these trends continue, the students that I'm having in my classes today don't have very much to look forward to. And it is one of the absolute essential premises of the new party to try to reverse that trend. While household income has stagnated, folks, the income, the wealth of this country has not. This country has gotten much richer in the last 20 years. The problem is that the distribution of income in this country has become much worse. So that would be my response to your question, is that students have probably more to gain from this kind of project that the new party is putting forward than people who are older, who already have more secure positions in the economy.
Okay.
And I would say
Or maybe
not
a
just
worthy
students
job.
too. I'd say that it's low-income workers in our community as well. It's the woman who works at the nursing home that's not getting a living wage and can barely support her family and doesn't have access to decent, safe, and affordable housing. It's it's someone who maybe is losing. Our economy is really shifting and changing here in Montana. A lot of the resource jobs have left, and you're really moving towards an economy that's in the service sector. And those jobs aren't paying a living wage. People can't support their families. So I don't think it's just even for students. I think our solution is for a much broader base of our community.
That's for working families and workers.
Well,
And it's very heavily for working women. Women. Let's say this word, women. Democrats think, women means, first trimester abortion. We think women means half of humanity. Women.
Okay, so a woman out there wants to get involved and wants to learn more about the new party. What should she do?
Call us up, please. And the number locally is
728-1435.
half of our candidates are women, half of our steering committees, half the national governance. And this is, I don't think it's going to diminish anytime soon.
And if you call us at that number here in Missoula, what you'll get is a response, or we'll have a conversation with you about different ways that you can actually key in. And I'll just say briefly, I know we're running out of time,
Got 1 minute.
that the thing that we're really keen up for now is upcoming council elections. We have 5 people that we've endorsed on the current council, and we're looking to maintain those 5 and get a couple of more. And we think that we have really improved the quality of the council by our work, and we're going to continue to further that along. And I just really want to make it very clear to folks that if you join into this new party, that however you would like to participate, we encourage you to do. If that's to just support us financially, we really need that to make this thing work. But if you'd like to become more involved and get involved in the decision-making process that we're involved in about how to move forward on the council and other issues of common interest in the community, that you're most welcome to join in that way. I think that's another thing that really distinguishes the new party.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Well, that's good.
Okay.
We went a long way.